At its peak, one coal mine in Japan powered factories, railways, ships, chemical plants, and an entire city of more than 200,000 people. Then it became the site of the largest labor dispute in modern Japanese history. 3 years after that, 458 miners were dead, and even that was not the end. This is Miike Coal Mine, asterisk Miike Tonko asterisk in Japanese, on the coast of Kyushu, between Fukuoka Prefecture and Kumamoto Prefecture. For more than a century, it was not just a mine, it was a machine that helped build modern Japan. But Miike also tells a darker story, how industrial success can depend on silence, on sacrifice, and on people being treated as part of the machinery. If you want to understand how Japan industrialized, how its labor movement was broken, and how entire cities can rise and fall around a single industry, you can watch all of it happen here, in one mine. Welcome back to Lost Japan, where we uncover the places and stories that history almost buried. Today we're going to Miike, the biggest coal mine Japan ever had, and one of the few places where you can see the whole arc of modern Japanese history in a single landscape. Ambition, technology, labor conflict, disaster, decline, it all passed through this one stretch of coast on the Ariake Sea. Miike sits on the southern edge of Fukuoka Prefecture and the northern edge of Kumamoto, facing the Ariake Sea, a shallow body of water famous for its enormous tides and broad mudflats. Today, if you visit the area, what you see first are the remains, the steel head frame of Miyahara Pit, the red brick buildings of Manda Pit, the old coal railway corridor, and Miike Port pushing out into the sea like a piece of industrial geometry. But these remains only make sense once you understand the scale of what used to be here. Coal had been known in this region for centuries. Local tradition places its discovery in 1469, and commercial extraction began in 1721. But Miike only became historically important after the Meiji state took direct control in 1872 and then sold the mine to Mitsui in 1889. That was the moment Miike stopped being a regional resource and became a national project. Under Mitsui, the mine was modernized at enormous speed. Deep shafts were sunk, British machinery was imported, new pumping systems were installed to deal with the constant flooding that made Miike difficult to work. Rail links were expanded, and in 1908, Miike Port was completed so coal could be loaded efficiently regardless of the Ariake Sea's massive tidal shifts. Mine, railway, port, extraction, transport, export. It was a complete industrial system, and around that system, a city grew. The man most associated with Miike's rise was Takuma Dan, asterisk Dan Takuma asterisk in Japanese, an engineer who had studied mining and metallurgy at MIT and understood that if Miike was going to matter, it had to operate at a scale Japan had never seen before. And it did. Miike produced high-quality bituminous coal, the kind of fuel a rapidly industrializing country desperately needed. It powered steamships, it fed factories, it supported chemical production, and later, after World War II, it became one of the engines of Japan's reconstruction. By the middle of the 20th century, Umuta had become a classic company city. Housing, schools, hospitals, shops, rail infrastructure, port facilities, everything revolved around the mine. In 1959, the city's population reached 208,877. That is an astonishing number for a place whose identity was so closely tied to one industry. For decades, coal was known in Japan as asterisk kuroi dia asterisk, black diamond. At Miike, that phrase felt literal. The mine generated immense wealth and helped fuel the country's transformation into an industrial power. But the story was never clean. In the early modern expansion period, convicts from the nearby Miike prison were forced to work in and around the mine. During World War II, Allied prisoners of war were also sent here as laborers. Even at its most celebrated, Miike carried the marks of coercion. That tension is part of what makes the site so powerful. Miike was a symbol of progress, yes, but also a reminder that progress is very often built on unequal choices. Some people get electricity, steel, fertilizers, and growth. Other people go underground, and by the late 1950s, the crisis began with a shift that was happening across the entire world, the move from coal to oil. By the end of the 1950s, management at Mitsui understood that coal was becoming a sunset industry. Mechanization was advancing. Imported energy was changing the market. So in 1959, Mitsui moved to cut jobs at Miike. 1,462 workers were targeted for dismissal or forced retirement. The response was explosive. Miike's union was one of the strongest in Japan, and miners did not see the layoffs as a minor restructuring. They saw them as the beginning of the end. More than 30,000 miners and family members joined protests, stoppages, and mass actions. Mitsui answered with a lockout. What followed was not just a labor dispute. It became a national confrontation between organized labor and big business. Money poured in from both sides. Right-wing gangs were brought in. Riot police were deployed. The fight spilled onto roads, gates, and even the Ariake Sea, where union members tried to block supplies from reaching the mine. On March 29, 1960, a miner named Kyushu Kubo was stabbed to death during the conflict. That killing made something brutally clear. This was no longer about one company's payroll. Miike had become a battlefield over what post-war Japan was going to be. Would workers have real power in the new Japan? Or would economic growth come first, even if it meant crushing the people who had created that growth in the first place? In the end, the miners lost. After 312 days, the lockout ended on December 1st, 1960. The union returned to work defeated. For many historians, Miike marks the high-water mark and the beginning of the retreat of post-war labor militancy in Japan. The country kept growing, but it did so on terms that had just been decided. 3 years later, Miike became the site of a second national trauma. On November 9, 1963, at the Mikawa pit of the Miike mine complex, runaway mine cars triggered a coal dust explosion deep underground. The blast itself was terrible. What followed was worse. Carbon monoxide spread through the tunnels. Hundreds of miners who had survived the initial explosion were poisoned in the darkness, many without fully understanding what had happened. By the end, 458 people were dead. Another 839 suffered carbon monoxide poisoning, in many cases with severe and permanent neurological damage. It remains one of the worst mining disasters in Japanese history, and the worst of the post-war era. What makes Miike especially haunting is the timing. The labor dispute had ended only 3 years earlier. Critics later argued that productivity had been prioritized over safety, and that the defeat of the militant union had weakened resistance inside the mine just when conditions were becoming more dangerous. And yet the machine kept running. In 1970, Miike reached its highest annual output ever, 6.57 million tons of coal. That detail feels almost unreal. After the labor war, after the explosion, after everything, the mine still hit its all-time production peak. But by then, the long-term direction was already set. Japan was shifting to oil. Imported coal was cheaper. Domestic coal mining could no longer compete at the same scale. Output and employment began a long decline, and the city that had been built around black diamonds slowly lost its reason to exist. In March 1997, Miike finally closed. More than a century of industrial history ended not with a dramatic collapse, but with a decision on paper. The machine stopped. Today, Miike survives in fragments. The most visible are the preserved industrial sites, Miyahara Pit in Umuta, Manda Pit in Arao, the old railway corridor, and Miike Port. In 2015, these became part of the UNESCO World Heritage listing for the sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution. Seen from a distance, they are beautiful in the way industrial ruins often are. Clean lines, red brick, steel frames, ambitious engineering. But Miike is not just a heritage landscape, it is also a memory landscape. The museums and local archives do not only preserve machinery, they preserve the lives that machinery organized: miners, wives, children, union activists, engineers, prisoners, accident victims, entire neighborhoods shaped by the logic of extraction. And the city still carries the afterimage of its past. Umuta's population today is only a little over half of what it was at the coal boom's peak. Once the mine went, the city had to spend decades trying to answer an almost impossible question. What does a place become after the industry that made it is gone? Miike doesn't offer an easy answer. It just leaves the evidence standing there in steel and brick. Miike is not important because it was big, though it was. And it is not important only because it was tragic, though it was that too. It matters because it compresses so much of modern Japan into one story. Industrial ambition, imported technology, forced labor, company towns, union power, union defeat, mass disaster, energy transition, urban decline, heritage preservation. Most of those stories are usually told separately, as if they belong to different chapters of history. At Miike, they all happen in the same place. That is what makes it unforgettable. The mine changed Japan, but Japan also changed the mine, and then left it behind. What do you think should be remembered most when a place like this becomes heritage? The engineering, the prosperity, or the human cost? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching Lost Japan. I'll see you in the next one.